The quiet power of knowing exactly who you are. There are two kinds of men in any room, and the difference between them is not visible in the usual ways. It is not the suit, the posture, the ease of the smile. Both kinds can be dressed. Well, both can be charming when the situation calls for it. But one of them, the moment the social pressure drops or the conversation turns towards something real, begins to subtly shift. He reads the room. He adjusts. He softens the edges of his opinion when he senses resistance. He emphasizes different parts of himself depending on who is paying attention. He is not dishonest. Exactly. He just has not yet decided who he is. So he lets the room decide for him. The other man does none of this, not because he is rigid or arrogant, but because the question of who he is was settled a long time ago, in private, without an audience. And that settled quality, that interior stillness, is the most quietly powerful thing a person can carry into a room. You have met this second man before. Maybe you could not. Name what made him different at the time. He was not the loudest. He was not necessarily the most successful or the most physically imposing, but something about him made you feel, almost immediately, that he was not available for the usual games. He was not trying to impress you. He was not waiting for your approval. He was simply present, fully, in the specific way that only people with a strong inner axis can manage. And, if you are honest, you remember him longer than you remember, the ones who worked harder to be remembered. Most men spend enormous energy on the external signals of identity, the gym, the career title, the wardrobe, the social media presence carefully curated to suggest a particular kind of life. None of this is wrong, but underneath all of it, when the performance stops and the apartment is quiet and it is just you and the mirror, a question lives that most men have never seriously answered. Who are you when there is nothing to perform for? What do you actually believe, value, want, and refuse? Not what you were told to believe, not what your environment rewarded, not the identity you assembled to. Survive your 20s. Who are you, specifically and honestly, right now? Most men have a vague answer to this, a collection of preferences and habits they mistake for identity. This chapter is about why that vagueness costs you more than you realize, and what it looks like to replace it with something real. Identity, in the way it actually functions in a man's life, is not a philosophy. It is a set of decisions that have already been made. When you know who you are at the foundational level, you do not have to deliberate in real time about how to respond to pressure, flattery, criticism, or temptation. The decision is, upstream of the moment, you have already answered the question. So when the situation arrives, you are not negotiating with yourself. You are simply acting from a place that was settled before you walked in. This is what gives certain men their quality of unhurried ease. It is not that nothing affects them. It is that their center of gravity does not shift based on what is happening around them. Picture a man on a third date. Things are going well. She is engaged. The conversation has been alive for 2 hours. And somewhere in the middle of it, she says, almost casually, that she is not really into men who are too focused on their careers. She says it lightly, maybe even playfully, but she is watching, the way people always watch in those unguarded moments. 2. See what he does with it. The man without a settled identity feels the small seismic event of that statement. He recalibrates. He walks his professional ambition back a little, softens his language around it, finds a way to suggest that work is not really that important to him. He does not decide to lie. He just wants the approval to continue, and so he unconsciously edits himself toward what seems to be wanted. She notices this, not consciously perhaps, but somewhere in her body she registers E.T. A small amount of trust evaporates, not because she disagrees with his revised position, but because she sensed the revision. She sensed the seam where his real answer was, stitched over with her preferred one. The man with a settled identity handles this differently. He hears the same comment, and something in him is briefly aware of the fork in the road, but he takes neither branch. He simply tells the truth. He says that his work matters to him, that it is connected to something he is genuinely building, and that he understands not everyone values that the same way. Number defense. No apology, no attempt to win the argument or convert her. He states the reality of who he is with the specific. calm of someone who has already made peace with the fact that not everyone will approve of it, and paradoxically, that is exactly what earns her respect. Not agreement, not strategy, just the rare experience of sitting across from someone who cannot be edited. Here is the misconception that keeps most men from developing this quality. They believe that knowing who you are is something that happens to you, either through extraordinary experiences, a formative crisis, or simply the passage of enough time. They are waiting to be forged by circumstances into someone with conviction, but identity does not arrive. It is constructed, deliberately and often uncomfortably, through a process of honest self-examination that most men actively avoid because it requires confronting not just who they are, but who they have been pretending to be. The gap between those two things is not always flattering, and the ego would rather stay vague than face a precise and unflattering truth. The reframe is this: knowing who you are is not feeling you. Wait for, it is a practice you commit to. It begins with the small, daily act of noticing when you are performing versus when you are being. Notice the moments you change your position, because the room seems to want something different. Notice when you agree, not because you actually agree, but because agreement is easier than the friction of a real opinion. Notice when you describe yourself in different terms to different people, not out of appropriate social flexibility, but out of a shapeless need to be accepted by all of them. These are not character flaws. They are data. They are the map of the places where your identity is still unfinished, still porous, still waiting for external validation to tell it what shape to take. You need to begin answering the foundational questions with more precision than you ever have. Not in a journal if that is not natural to you, but in the quiet of your own thinking. Honestly, and without the audience of anyone else's expectations. What do you actually believe about how a man should live? Not what you think sounds good. Not what your father modelled. Not what the culture currently rewards. What do you, in your most private and honest assessment, believe? What are the things you will not compromise regardless of the social cost? What kind of work feels like it is coming from something real in you versus what you do purely for external reward? What do you want your daily life to feel like? Not your Instagram version of it, but the actual texture of your Tuesday mornings. These questions feel soft until you try to answer them with real precision, and then they are the hardest questions you will ever sit with. The men who sit with them anyway are the ones who eventually stop needing the room's approval to feel solid. That solidity, once built, changes everything downstream. It changes how you enter a conversation, because you are no longer scanning for approval before you speak. It changes how you handle conflict, because you are not defending a fragile, unexamined identity but a set of values you have consciously chosen and can therefore hold without panic. It changes how you are experienced by the people closest to you, because there is something deeply restful about being near a person whose center does not move with every shift in the weather, and it changes what you attract, not just in relationships but in every domain of life, because clarity of identity is a form of signal. It tells the world, without a single word, what you are available for and what you are not. The work of becoming a man who knows exactly who he is does not announce itself as work at the time. It looks like 100 small refusals to take the easier, vaguer path. It looks like saying the true thing in the moment when the false thing would have been more comfortable. It looks like staying with a difficult question about yourself long after the urge to distract yourself has peaked and passed. None of it is dramatic. Most of it is invisible, but the accumulation of those choices is the only process by which a man moves from being someone shaped by his environment to being someone who shapes his environment by the simple fact of his presence. The people in your life will feel this shift before they can name it. Something about you will become harder to manipulate, not because you are less kind, but because you are less available to be edited. Something about you will become easier to trust, not because you are more predictable, but because you are more consistent. And consistency at the level of values is the deepest form of reliability a person can offer. The relationships that survive this shift will be the ones worth keeping, the ones that depended on your shapelessness, on your willingness to be whatever the situation seemed to require, will recalibrate or fall away. Both outcomes are information. There will be moments, even after you have done this work, where the pull toward approval is strong, where someone important to you seems to want a version of you that does not quite match the one you have built. In those moments, the man you are becoming does not fight the pull with effort. He simply notices it, names it internally for what it is, and returns to the settled place that no longer needs to be defended because it no longer feels threatened. That returning, practiced enough times, becomes the most natural thing in the world. It becomes, eventually, the thing people mean when they say a man has presence. You will not always be certain. Certainty is not the goal. The goal is a relationship with yourself that is honest enough to know the difference between a genuine evolution of your values and a capitulation dressed up as growth. The goal is to be at the center of your own life, a fixed point. Not fixed in the sense of closed or rigid, fixed in the sense of real, consistent. Yours. The man who knows exactly who he is does not need the room to confirm it, and that is precisely why the room always does.